is everything. So imagine that you are a person working for the Drug Enforcement Agency and you're listening to a cell phone conversation. Let's pretend you're listening to one of my cell phone conversations. And what you hear is a snippet. Could you pick up some Coke on your way home? And if you're a Drug Enforcement Agency person, you're thinking, whoop, Coke. They're selling Coke. So the question is, do I mean Coke or do I mean Coke? Do I mean the illegal drug, or am I making a request for a common carbonated caramel-colored beverage? Context is everything. And some people think that just because you hear something that they've heard the truth. But you have to have the context, the wider context, in order to know what's being said. By the way, I would say that the same thing is true of video clips that catch people doing all sorts of things. There has to be a larger context. Like, for example, every once in a while I'll show a video clip of some movie or something here as part of my sermon. And guess what? If I don't give you some context, sometimes it's like, what in the world was that all about? So you have to have context for everything. Everything is not self-explanatory. There has to be a larger background against which you see everything. And that is certainly true in the case of the Scriptures. People can and do often make the Bible say the most amazing and even untrue things. You can take one piece or a couple pieces from the Bible here and there and make it say all kinds of crazy things. And people have done that in the past. And so I just wanted to look today, we're getting back to the narrative lectionary. And the narrative lectionary was dreamed up by some Lutherans, but it's still a good thing. And in fact, it's a wonderful thing because a lot of times when you preach the lectionary, it's supposed to give you Bible passages so that you don't just preach your own hobby horse, which is a good thing. You know, if you let a pastor go and let him preach whatever he wants to preach, it'll be the same thing Sunday after Sunday. Different words, different scriptures, but the same message. So, if you look at the narrative lectionary, the idea behind it is in the space of 1 year, you will get the whole biblical story, the larger context of the biblical story. And so we're starting with Abraham. Abraham is a good place to start because Abraham is a key. In fact, some people would say Abraham is the key to understanding what the whole Bible is all about. So we're going to spend a little bit of time today looking for the big picture of the Scriptures, starting with Abraham. In the first place, to give you a little context for Abraham, so far, you know, Abraham appears in Genesis 12. And there's 11 chapters before Abraham starts. And you all know, most of you know, what's in those 11 chapters. Chapters 1 and 2 of Genesis have the stories about God's creation. Exactly. The first 2 chapters are about God's creation. And the main thing that you need to know, at least for this message, is that everything that God created was good. Very simple. First 2 chapters, God made everything, and at every point in it, he says, look, it's good. And then when the whole thing is done, he looked at the whole thing and said, look, behold, it was very, very good. So that's the first 2 chapters. But then chapters 3 through 11 tell a sordid tale, a sordid, S-O-R-D-I-D, not an assorted tale. A sordid tale of rebellion and sin and murder. So you know in Genesis 3, Adam and Eve are in Eden. They eat the forbidden fruit, and they're kicked out of the garden. Chapter 4, they have children, and then one of them kills the other one. Cain kills Abel. Chapter 5, Lamech, another descendant of Adam and Eve, murders someone and threatens to take vengeance sevenfold if anybody even touches him. It's like the original backseat vacation child. If anybody even touches me, I'm going to kill him. So, you know, there's this protection that's put on him so that he doesn't get killed and he doesn't kill anybody. And then, you know what happens next in the story. The flood. And the whole way through this, as if you're a reader of any kind, you're thinking, how could things have gone so badly? And is there any way that it can be made right again? And so what is the reason for the flood? Does anybody remember what the flood's reason is?
Sin.
Sin, right. God looks out and he sees in Genesis 6, 5, I have that written down, but I'm not looking at it. Genesis 6, 5, God sees that the inclination of human beings' hearts are on nothing but evil continually. And so God is going to wipe them out. Wipes out all living things on the face of the earth. I think the fish made it through. This is my hunch. But everything else is wiped out. All human beings are wiped out as a response. Now, the question you have to ask yourself if you're reading that is, did it work? No, it didn't work. In fact, you all know that in the beginning, before the flood, God says he picks out Noah, a righteous man, the most righteous man in the land. And what's the first thing that happens when Noah comes out of the ark? Do you remember?
Gets drunk.
He gets drunk. And there's even, I probably shouldn't go into this, but there's some rabbinical scholars that believe that not only does Noah get drunk, but there's that thing where his son goes in and sees him laying naked, and he goes out and tells his brothers that his father's laying drunk and naked, and they go in backwards with the thing. Some people think that that's a sort of a euphemistic way of talking about a homosexual rape. The point is, here's the most righteous man possible, and everybody else is wiped out. God's going to start again, and guess what happens? The same darn thing, over and over again. It doesn't work. Now, you should keep that in your mind, because that in itself is an important lesson. That just seeing sin and smashing it doesn't work. Something else has to happen. Human beings working from within their own systems, their own, what they can do, cannot solve the problem of sin and rebellion. They can't do it. The flood showed that at the very beginning, and we all know that from living. No matter how badly you want to, no matter how much force or coercion or whatever it is that people bring down, and Christians themselves have down through the centuries used a lot of force and coercion. Think of the Crusades. Think of what the heritage of that is. Think of the Inquisition. The Spanish Inquisition was an effort by the Catholic Church to finally, once and for all, wipe out heresy so that Christian theology could flourish. And it did not work. So that kind of thing, at the very beginning, is taken off the table. Something else has to happen as a solution to sin. So Genesis 3 through, and then of course you get the Tower of Babel, which again is people as a whole rebelling against what God wanted. God tells Noah that he goes, fill and multiply through the earth, and they start to do that. And then Babel comes and they get back together again, and they're building a tower to make a name for themselves, and they're going to reach up to the heavens, and God does away with the tower and scatters the people, but it's not a good scattering. It's not the kind that he would have wanted in the first place. So again, by the end of Genesis 11, the intuitive reader is thinking, how is this ever going to be made right? How are we going to get back to what God obviously originally intended? And the answer is, if you ask what is God going to do about sin and rebellion, the answer is that he's going to call an elderly, childless couple in Iraq. And through them is going to do something that's going to change everything around. Through them and through their descendants. And that's where this whole Genesis 12 call of Abraham thing comes in, because it's the first place where we see God beginning to act in a way that's going to change everything around it. In fact, some people would say that the whole of the scriptures can be looked at in that paradigm. And you'll see, when I say it, that it's one of those things that is part of the fabric of life. There's a beginning that's good. Things go horribly wrong. For a long time, things go horribly wrong, and yet the author is at work trying to make things right again. And finally, in the end, after a big struggle, things are made right. And so in the book of Revelation, you see at the very end of things, things are right again. Now, there is somebody who's saying, there really is only one story. There's only one story available to be written, and that's the story. Try to write a story in which evil triumphs. You can't do it. It just doesn't seem right. It doesn't feel right. It can't happen. There has to be a beginning that's good. There has to be a middle with lots of struggle where things go bad and all kinds of interesting things happen and good things and bad things. And then there has to be a wrap up at the end where everything turns out well again. That's the story. That's the whole story. That's one of the reasons why, by the way, why you can see God's fingerprints and everything. I'm going to show you a video clip at the end of this from Superman, the Man of Steel. And you're thinking, Superman, the Man of Steel, what does that have to do? You're going to see God's fingerprints are everywhere, even with people who were making and writing the movie that had no intention of bringing forth the scriptures and bringing forth that one story of the struggle between good and evil and so on. That's everywhere, because that's the way God made things. That's why you can look at almost everything. You can't say everything, but almost everything, even that human beings create, you can see God's fingerprints in it. St. Augustine used to say about the people that were heretics in his day, he would say, isn't it amazing that even that people have been created in God's image and have a mind that have been created by God don't see that and go off in their own direction? Isn't it amazing that God allows that? Anyway, the answer that God is going to give begins in a most inauspicious way with a childless elderly couple in Iraq who God is going to bless. And he's going to give them a child and descendants. In fact, it says that they're going to be descendants more numerous than the stars in the sky in Genesis 15, because God reiterates that promise several times to Abraham. There's going to be descendants more numerous than sand on the seashore. For those of you who think that heaven is populated by just a few people like us, there's going to be more people there than people can be counted. In the book of Revelation, at the end, in chapter 7, it says that John says that he saw a multitude of people gathered around the throne of God that no human being can count, and that is taken from every single tribe and language and tongue and culture on the face of the earth. So that's where we're going, and how we get there, at least the beginning of how we get there, is Abraham and Sarah. Notice that Abraham and Sarah, and this is the last thing I'm going to say about them today. Abraham and Sarah are called to be participants in what God is doing. They're called to be participants. God makes promises to them, and they have to respond to the promises. God says, I'm going to bless you, and I'm going to bless all of the nations on the earth through you and your descendants. There's a Bethel series, a Bible study, that one of the key concepts that you memorize as you go through there is Genesis 12, blessed to be a blessing. I memorized that when I was in college. Genesis 12, Abraham and Sarah, they're blessed to be a blessing. They're called to participate in the blessing that God is going to give. They have to leave their own home and their own country. If they're going to inherit a land that God's going to give them, they have to leave the land that they're in. If they're going to have descendants, they're going to have to do you know what. So that God can bless them to do that, they have to participate. They can't hear what God is going to do and promise and then just sit back and go, okay then. Do it, God. They have to participate. They're called into it as participants. And their participation is crucial. So, God promises to bless Abraham and Sarah, and through them to bless all the nations on the earth. And ever since that promise in Genesis 12, verse 3, I think it is, ever since that promise, the whole project of God has been to bless the whole earth, all the peoples on the face of the earth, through the descendants of Abraham and Sarah. Of course, that's fulfilled in Jesus Christ. That's what Paul is talking about in Galatians 3. That promise to Abraham and Sarah is fulfilled in Jesus Christ. In fact, Paul says that the gospel is preached beforehand. Now, if you look, that's always been an amazing thing to me. I read in Galatians 3, Paul says, God preached the gospel beforehand to Abraham. And you look back at Abraham, and there's nothing in it about Jesus Christ dying on the cross. There's nothing in it about Jesus rising from the dead. And yet the gospel was preached beforehand, because the gospel is that God is not going to let the earth go further and further away from him. He's acting to restore it. And that's what the gospel preached beforehand is, that God is going to bless all of the nations on the earth through the descendants, through the seed of Abraham and Sarah, who is Jesus Christ. Let me read you the last couple of verses or a couple of the middle verses that end that section of Galatians 3. Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us, for it is written, cursed is everyone who is hung on a tree. He redeemed us in order that the blessing given to Abraham might come to the Gentiles, which means to everyone, through Christ Jesus, so that by faith we might receive the promise of the Holy Spirit. So the promises of Abraham to bless the whole world come to fruition and fulfillment in Jesus Christ. Now let me show you a modern reflection of that. All right? This is a scene from Man of Steel, and in this scene, we have Kal-El, who is Superman, and his father, and they are up in space looking at the earth, and the love of Clark, Superman's wife, Lois, is plummeting towards the earth in a capsule from these aliens that have come to invade the creation and shape it the way they want to shape it. And they're going to kill Lois because she has not given up Superman, although she did, because they did some mind probes and they did some torture. You're going to hear about that in a minute. And so they're killing her. And they're going to wipe out the whole earth and make the whole earth so that they can fit it for their purposes and their use. And this is Superman's father. It's complicated. You have to see the movie. This is Superman's father telling him what he can do. All right? Let me get the thing up here so you can hear it. And then we'll see how it goes. But that scene sort of encapsulates the Christian faith, right? The love of Clark's life, love of Superman's life is plummeting to the earth towards a fiery death, certain death, unless somebody does something. And Clark's father says to him, you can save her. In fact, you can save them all, which he proceeds to do in the rest of the movie. He saves her out of the fiery, plummeting towards certain death. He saves her. And then, I don't know if you caught this when they were talking at the end, that's why that was left in there, is that she says, the first thing that she says to him is, I'm sorry. Because they tortured her, got into her mind, and forced her to give up, forced her to, deny Superman. Give him up to the people who were trying to kill him. And he says, it's all right. I know. They did the same thing to me. He forgives her because he's already been through the same torture. He's already been through the same thing she has. And he saves her. And he goes on, of course, to save the planet, or we wouldn't be sitting here, right? But now the people that wrote that, the people that filmed that, are not Christians necessarily. There might have been a writer that was a Christian, I don't know. I know that the two head writers were Jewish. And they didn't have any thought of trying to teach the Christian faith. But my point is that that story is so much everywhere in the fabric of who we are that you can't get away from it. So even people that don't necessarily, have a love for God or for Jesus Christ or for the Christian faith at all, end up doing that because of the fact that that's the way God made us. That's the story that started with Abraham. That's the story of the Bible. The story of everything good, things go really bad, people need to be delivered. God works in and through the people themselves to bring about the deliverance, especially by sending his own son to take the punishment upon himself that should have been ours. That's why that scene is so important when Clark says, I know they did the same thing to me. He's the one who can save because he's the one who gave up himself. That's the story of the Bible. And that's the story that you can see almost everywhere that you look if you have eyes to see, because it's there and you can't get away from it. That's how God promised to do it. By the way, the story is here as well, because it's written in words given by Jesus himself, in the body and the blood of Christ, in the bread and in the cup. So as you come today, let this be not only a way for you to renew your covenant with God in Christ, but let it also be a way to train your eyes to see this everywhere that you look. Because that's what God is doing. Let's close in prayer.